Good afternoon, Sir Zama, senior colleagues, my colleagues, everyone on the platform. I want to welcome you this afternoon to the discourse by the Center of Excellence in Migration and Global Studies, National Open University of Nigeria, situated at Abuja or in Abuja. I welcome you to our presentation today. May I officially say this particular presentation is dedicated to the new Vice Chancellor of National Open University of Nigeria. We just have a new Vice Chancellor taking his position today in the person of Professor Uduma Oji Uduma. He has Zoom office today, so the university has been full of fanfare as he's taking his position today. So I welcome you. So it's a special edition that we are having today. I welcome all our academic gurus, our Vice Chancellor, past and present. Most importantly, I welcome our founding father of this center, the founding father of the Center of Excellence in Migration and Global Studies, National Open University, is Professor Hakeem Ibikule Tijani. I welcome you, sir, to this presentation today. I welcome all our professors that I may not be able to mention you by name. I welcome everyone who came early. Thank you for joining on time. I want to assure you that today will be so instructive and so packed with all form of enlightenment as it relates to migration matters. So thank you for coming. I'll be co-hosting this program today with my colleague at the center, the person of Dr. David Uta, and we're going to be hosting this together. Immediately I do this introduction and we hand over to him to take over from there. Today we are presenting our colleague, our father, a seasoned professor with seasoned knowledge in diverse areas, in the person of Professor Chike Fidelis Okolocha. Professor Chike Fidelis Okolocha. In due time, Dr. David will do the introduction of Professor Fidelis Okolocha. Then we'll take up from there. His presentation is going to just be for 40 minutes. Then we are going to have questions coming in and contribution as we may find it necessary. But let me first introduce our center to you. Center of Excellence in Migration and Global Studies, National Open University of Nigeria. It's a fulcrum of evidence-based research about pressing and emerging migrations and global challenges in Nigeria, in Africa, and the globe at large. The center was established in February 2020 with a seed grant from TED Fund. The center has grown to be a hub with emphasis on field-based research that impacts policies, formulation, and execution for solutions to both internal and global migration. We focus on internal capacity building, first and foremost, and stress Afrocentric-based method in art, humanities, social sciences, and sciences. It is the first of its kind in Nigeria and an innovation with distinct concept, context, perspective, and focus. As a research hub, the center is engaged in research about migration and global studies, both internal and external. And its conceptualization, contextualization, and colonization are primarily for internal paradigm, dimensions, and capacity development for field-based research and policy-oriented recommendations arising therefrom. Our migration observatory is field-based using ethnographic and art method and extensive narratives that validate theory. Our vision is to bridge the gap between humanity, present, and the future. will provide sustainable leverage for interdisciplinary research in migration and global studies. Our core values are integrity, inclusion, diversity, service, and participatory. What are our mandates? To provide leverage for field-based and solution-driven research, to serve as agents of national policy for migration and global studies, to seek grants for academic activities and outreach for sustainability, to publish and sustain peer review and academic journal and monograph series, to collaborate with stakeholders in the field of migration, global studies, and policymakers, to organize occasional seminars, workshops, conferences, public lecture, the borders of migrations and allied matter. Let me also inform you that we are presently collecting evidence-based research for our journal publication. The call for paper is out. Please, if you have papers, evidence-based research, fieldwork research to present for publication in our journal, it is free of charge. Kindly send in your paper. It is TED Fund sponsor. Thank you for joining us today. I want to assure you that we're going to have a robust discussion. So we welcome your own contributions and questions immediately after the presentation. Can I have Dr. David Uta take over to introduce our presenter and carry on for the moderation today? Dr. David, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Good morning once again to everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's program. Today, we are going to be looking at an interesting topic, which is going to be presented by an erudite scholar, Professor Chike Fidelis Okolocha. Professor Chike Fidelis Okolocha trained as a sociologist and anthropologist at the University of Ibadan, University of Nigeria, Soka, where he received a PhD as a research scholar and began his career. He became a professor at the University of Benin in 2005 and gave his inaugural lecture on the Afropolis and African Urban Revolution in 2014. He is the immediate past president of the Social Science Academy of Nigeria and a member of over a dozen academic societies across the globe, as well as UN Habitat's Urban Thinkers Campus. He has attended most sections of the UN World Urban Forum and is a former director of IOM Observatory at the University of Benin. Prof. Chike Okolocha has received research grants from several global and local agencies, including World Bank, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundations, Shell Petroleum Development Company, British Council, Chevron, the Canadian National Development Agency, TED Fund, and AA Holdings. A prolific scholar, he has published scores of journal articles within and outside Nigeria, a dozen book chapters, 8 books, several technical reports. He was once a special assistant to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and currently a fellow of the Social Science Academy of Nigeria, fellow of Nigerian Anthropological and Sociological Association, and a research professor at the Center of Excellence in Migration and Global Studies, National University of Nigeria. While we welcome him on stage to take the floor, he has 35 minutes of presentation, after which we have 25 minutes of question and answer and contributions. Before I hand over the stage to him, I want to also remind us that you can follow CMGS actively on our social media platforms, which will be on display on the communication or chat link below. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite us to pay a keen and rapt attention to the presentation by our erudite professor, Prof. Chike Fidelis Okolocha. Thank you, everybody. Prof, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. The director of the center, ladies and gentlemen, I can see that most of my friends tuned in. Now, I have 35 minutes, and 31 slides. So I think I should be able to rush through it. And like the director just said now, this is the second presentation under the leadership of the center. But this is the first under the new administration of the Vice Chancellor. So this is a dubious distinction of taking first. Now, so my first slide is right on the screen, and it's just the title of my presentation. Another look at the new economics of labor migration. My second slide is introduction. And I started by saying that migration studies are generally mainly very statistical, and they usually focus on origin as things like poverty, the drivers of migration, poverty, the crisis, exclusion, and all the decision to migrate. Those things have to do with the origin. It also has to do with there's also emphasis on the travel, that is the route taking and the experiences of migrants. In this century, we've been talking about the famous Mediterranean route, through which many people have died. Then we also talk about destinations. What happens at the destinations, especially the hostility in Europe, the new hostility in the United States of America, and even hostility against Nigerians in many African countries. So we also talk about, how people adapt at the destinations, the culture shock experience, how they struggle to get a job. Then, of course, migration studies also talk about the advantages of migration, and the new economics of labor migration dwells on the advantages of migration. But there are quite a lot of disadvantages which migration studies also focus on. Then we also focus on policies. In recent times, the policies have been quite dramatic, especially since the upsurge of right-wing politics in Europe, and especially the new one now being championed by Donald Trump in the United States. Then finally, the migration study talk about institutions about migration. In fact, CNG, that's the Center of Migration and Global Studies, is an institution established mainly to tackle issues of migration. Now, I go to the next slide, which talks about the theories. Now, we all know that migration is an all-comers area of research. We have geographers, pure scientists, economists, political scientists, historians, you name them. Because of this, there are so many theories, and nobody can point to a theory that we can say this is the one representing migration studies. I just listed 10 of these theories, and if you permit me, I'll just say a word or two about each of these theories without taking a lot of time. The first one, there's neoclassical theory, and this is the one generally associated with Todaro and Smith. And what it says precisely is that international migration is a result of an individual's choice, driven by income gaps between the point of origin and the destination. The second one is about push and pull theory. Perhaps that is the most popular of the theories, and as they were Everett Lee, I talked about what pushes somebody away from where he's staying and what attracts him where he's going. The third one is world system theory. This is a very popular theory postulated by Manuel Wallerstein, and it just says that it is the inequality between different parts of the world that drive migration. The fourth one there is dual labor markets theory. This theory is really about advanced countries where it is said that they have dual labor market. The primary market is, and the conditions of service are not set. So this secondary labor market in the advanced country is a market that attracts migrants from the poorer parts of the world. That takes me straight to the social capital theory. We say that migrants are more likely to move to areas. So I was on the seventh theory. I've just listed 10 theory. I was on the seventh one. The seventh one is the transnational theory, and this theory holds that migrants do not fully integrate in wherever they move to. All right. They always engage in ongoing relationship there while they keep in touch with points of origin. So you find that migration talks about transnational individuals. They are there abroad and here at home. The eighth theory is migration systems theory, and this theory just says there are very many factors at work on the migrants' psyche. This was one of the major proponents of the theories, our own Professor Mabo Bunje, who said that people are under control by there are so many sub-control systems at the point of origin and also point of destination. The next theory, I hope you are still with me. The next theory is the ninth one is the network theory. So quickly, the ninth theory talks about the network theory, which says migrants utilize a lot of networks to reduce difficulties associated with settling wherever they are going, looking for a job, and coping with culture shock. Then the 10th one is the human capital theory, which simply says that the overall incentive to accumulate human capital is reduced when the return to education for the migrant is less at the point of destination than at the point of origin. So quickly, those are the theories. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go into details about them because I have to go to the next slide, which is the significance of this study. Well, there is lack of knowledge of what makes people living in the same place for its origin migrate while others stay put despite the openness of opportunities. So truly, you can say a lot of things about people moving, but not everybody moves. So why is it that we are suffering the same difficulties? Some people move, others don't move. Next, there is a need for more theoretical research on migration in terms of the drivers, the patterns, and the consequences. All right, we can just assume, as we're going to see later, that one item fits all. Migration is a multi-dimensional thing that's very difficult to explain. That's why we need more theoretical research in migration. Thirdly, more theorization is needed with regards to skilled migration as it's constantly increasing. Skilled migration of skilled labor, and its consequences greatly affect both the sending and the receiving countries. Okay. Finally, with regards to distribution, like I said, migration is an emerging area of studies. It's presently struggling for independence. All right. So it is important for migration studies to identify, have a theoretical base like many other disciplines. So I now come to my fifth slide, which is introducing the new economics of labor migration. And what does this theory say? I summarize this by 3 points there, 3 bullets there. 1, migration is an effort by households, not individuals, to overcome market failures that constrain local production. Second, migrants provide households with liquidity in form of remittances to finance economic activities. Third, missing, inefficient, or poorly functioning markets are the drivers of migration. Okay, so let me now summarize. I'm going to, in the next 4 slides, I'm going to summarize the main assumptions of the new economics of labor migration. So in the context of international migration, truly, the new economics of labor migration is a theory that was born out of experiencing international migration. That theory assumes that, one, migration is a positive factor in economic development. Second, migration is not just a decision of individuals, all right? As a matter of fact, migration is individuals that migrate, but they do so on behalf of the group. Third, migration is not merely a result of wage differentials acting upon isolated individuals. Individuals are not isolated because there's a group always mediating. Fourth, the household unit or the family unit is the unit of analysis, not individuals. That's what the theory upholds. Again, remittances from migrants increase incomes and stimulate production in migrant sending areas. That is the positive factor the remittances play in migration. That is, those people left at home. The second slide on the assumptions of the new economics of migration. The first point is that migration is a deliberate collective strategy undertaken by households or families to diversify income. Decision taken by households and families, not individuals, to diversify income, diversify their income, mitigate risk, and overcome market failures at home. These remittances reduce or reverse negative lost labor and capital effects. What do I mean by that? Whatever you are losing by way of people migrating, you gain through remittances. Next, if migration is an export of labor, then remittances are part of the payment for the export. In other words, through remittances, you pay for the loss of labor. Next, non-migrants benefit. That's people who are left back home. They benefit even if they do not receive remittances, especially when remittances surpass what immigrants would have produced at home. Now, further assumptions include the following. One, if remittances increase incomes, they invariably have multiplier effects on incomes, employment, and production in migrant-sending areas. Next, if remittances to rural areas create more multiplier effects, what I mean by that is that remittances to rural areas tend to create more multiplier effects in rural areas than in urban areas. The remittances tend to favor middle income earners, thereby creating equalizing effects on income. In other words, when people migrate, they send money home, and the money they receive tend to uplift the people receiving the money in one way or the other. Now, the first slide is about the theoretical foundations. I've just talked about the assumptions. So what are the theoretical assumptions, foundations of the new economics of labor migration? The first is that migration is conceptualized as an explosion of strong social bonds of the wish to improve the lives of those left behind. All right? So there's a group that needs to send somebody abroad to bring goods home. Their remittances. Next, to maximize profits, owners of labor, that's the migrants, move with their labor, just as commodities are shipped. So in other words, owners of labor, the difference between export of commodities and export of labor is that owners of labor have feelings and that can make independent, have independent will, which is quite different from commodities which cannot talk. So whereas Whereas labor migration is about exports, just like export commodities, but the difference is that commodities don't have a will of their own. Next, people often engage in income comparisons with their reference groups, and this results in relative deprivation. So before I travel to America, I know that, oh, my peers in America are earning more than myself. So that decision alone makes me relatively deprived compared to my peers who have migrated. Now, the second slide on the theoretical assumptions of the new economics of labor migration is that a person more relatively deprived had a stronger incentive to migrate. So after comparing, and you see that, oh, there's no way you can catch up with your colleagues, your peers, your classmates, you migrate. A reference group characterized by more income inequality is likely to generate more relative deprivation and higher propensities to migrate. So what are these groups? Are they made up of more educated people? Because it is now said education is a trigger. The more educated you are, the more likely you have to migrate. And next, as people migrate, relative deprivation perceived by non-migrants change, thereby creating another incentive to migrate. So if I migrate, if somebody that doesn't migrate, and there's evidence that is doing better than myself, that's an incentive for me to migrate. The next theoretical foundation there is that migration behavior differs by level of skills. All right, laborers more likely to migrate than doctors, engineers more likely to migrate than lawyers. So those are the questions that inform the theory of new economics of labor migration. Other points there include the fact that decisions are jointly made by migrants and non-migrants. All right. So, like we said, it's a group thing, it's a household thing, it's a family thing. From that family, one person or a few people will migrate. So it's a joint decision made by migrants themselves and non-migrants. And costs and returns are shared based on implicit contractual agreement, and remittances are a function of temporal mutually beneficial agreement, non-migrants altruism. What I mean by that is that before a migrant leaves, there is a meeting of the group, maybe the family, the household, all right? And what is to be remitted is known in advance. Note that at times this group may have to take a loan, may take some credit to facilitate the movement. So what is to be returned is known. So that when the migrant goes there, it is not because he loves his people, that's why he wants to remit money. It's duty bound, it's contractual. The last point there is that migration is a calculated strategy embedding mutual interdependence, not an act of desperation, bounded optimism. In other words, before people migrate, they rationally think ahead. It's not something you do out of impulse. The group mediates that decision. Now, I want in the next 3 or 4 slides to give some empirical findings to support the new economics of labor, to support the assumptions and theoretical foundations of the new economics of labor migration theory. Now, in a study using the panel data on rural farm homes in Kenya, it was found that migration and remittances play a role in production activities of migrant sending households. Next, the same study found out that emigration, that's migration, has a beneficial effect on both the labor market and demographic evolution in Egypt. Thus, you can see that in Egypt now there's a pro-migration policy that sets up people to go to school specifically for migration. In Cape Verde, income from remittances was found to exceed that from maternal export by a ratio of 16 to 1. So you can imagine, for every $16 received in remittance, only $1 is gotten from export of merchandise. That's Cape Verde. And the next slide, I just put up a little table there. to show revenue to countries for remittances as revenue, as percentage of revenue from merchandise. All right, so what is the percentage of, what is the comparison between income from remittance and income from export? That's what they got from remittances. In Egypt, 75%, El Salvador, 75%, Jordan, 75%, Yemen, Greece, down to Pakistan, 25%.
We can't really get you, sir.
So you can see in the Middle East, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Yemen, Jordan, and Egypt. But of course, there are other countries that. So does that my data seem to give emphasis to the Middle East. Otherwise, it's a global thing. As we are going to see some examples in Nigeria later on. Now, in Mexico, it was found that for every dollar remitted by migrants, the gross national product increased by between $2.69 and $3.17. That's magnificent. It was also found that for any $1 remittance to Mexico, $0.29 and $0.3 increase in small farmer rural worker income. All right. Whereas the same remittance, $1 will lead to $1.1 increase for urban workers. In other words, urban workers seem to benefit more from migration than rural workers. In South Korea, between 1976 and 81, it was found that between 3 and 7% growth of the GNP was attributable to remittances. In 1982, 33% of the growth of the GNP was attributed to remittances. Okay, so we now come to Nigeria. What evidence do we have to support the new economics of labor migration in Nigeria? There are so many findings, and I just quoted some of them. First, it was found that a unit increase in remittance results in a 0.1138 unit decrease in poverty rate. All right. So the more remittances you have, the more the poverty rate decreases. Next, so those found out a 1% increase in remittance will, on the average, grow the economy by 0.10%. Another study also found out a 1% rise in remittance leads to a rise of 29% in GDP. You can see that magnificent. 1% rise in remittance leading to 29% rise in GDP. That's an empirical study here in Nigeria. Another study found out that a 1 unit rise in remittance and gross fixed capital formation will result in increasing GDP of between 0.1 to 0.49 points. All right. Now, so those are the empirical studies that support that the assumption of the new economics of labor migration, namely that remittances affect local economies very, very positively. Now, let's start by looking at the general critique, after which I will show you some empirical studies on the downside, negative side of the new economics of labor migration theory. The first is that general critique. Now, the first general critique is that the theory is a revoked neoclassical approach that reduces complex social actions to rationality. You remember when I talked about neoclassical theory, what I said was that migration was driven by income gaps between the migrant sending countries and the migrant receiving countries. And that would say that theory focuses exclusively on rationality. People move based on rational decisions only. And it fails to account for deep structural,
any form of collaboration.
political, and
that one is
historical
not for
that circumscribe migration. The also emphasizes that family are not restricted. This is another critique. We must understand that family decisions are not just made limited to utility maximization. It's not up to rationality. Now, another downside is that migration is not necessarily a controlled strategic decision to diversify risk. Not everybody that migrates does so to mitigate risk or diversify risk. All right. In this slide, I also present more of the general critique I've been going. So, if migrants take capital, that is, take themselves. If they take capital with them, the capital stock left at home will be reduced, and that will reduce productivity. Two, next, loss of labor and capital through migration may inhibit growth in migrant-sending economies, even if the migrants send money, it can inhibit growth. The next one is that remittances may be consumed instead of being invested, and this may deprave productivity. And such consumption have been shown to be concentrated in imported goods. All right. More on the general critique that migration is linked to the expansion of capitalism as a supply cheap labor to Europe and America. All right. Next, remittance is romanticized. So let us have money. And nobody's talking about the loss of manpower. Also note that remittance promotes consumption. In villages, you can see families buying cars instead of going to more productive activities. Now, you see, the new economics of labor migration is predictive and prospective. So it says, oh, please, people go make decisions before they travel, and they generally, bring on a lot of money. It is this sort of reasoning that has justified the immigration at all cost pandemic in Nigeria, as well as the Jagba syndrome, things like traveling to Europe by road, and all manners of illegal and dangerous migration, including human trafficking and modern-day slavery. All these things, people don't think about them. They just think about, oh, we're migrating to bring money. Okay? Now, most international remittances actually do not flow to the poorest members of the communities. This is an empirical finding. All right?
If you have started, if you are doing using my not completed.
All right? No, but migrants may engage in positive, robust political and societal debates at home. But it is also known that migrants also contribute to sustain conflict at home, either by financing underground movements, financing negative news items, other social media, and so on and so forth. Now, also, migration is not merely dependent on factors such as poverty, income differentials, and population growth. All right, there are so many other factors that can push migration, not just rational decisions by family groups, according to the new economics or labor migration theory. Now, heavy formal and informal remittances tend to sustain dual exchange rates. All right, because everybody, when you receive a remittance, you go to the black market. No matter how much the government does, you go to the black market, it gives you more naira. And more important, this whole question of thinking that, where they can maximize profit, get a lot of money. A lot of people migrate without knowing anything about their destinations. All right. So this is about there's a desperation in some type of migration that defies all rationality. Very important. This and that which will be very careful. Remittances or money do trigger development, as our experience has shown. If money can cause development, I can assure you that Delta State and Bayelsa State, which are among the richest states in the country, will be developed. Yet, they are among the least developed. And this is what we refer to as criticism of money.
Person cannot borrow your thing 1 second, you be worrying. But if she's somebody.
Remittances do not address critical infrastructure deficit. For example, families that receive the remittances can build boreholes, but they cannot municipal water supply, which is what we need. With remittances, you can buy a generator, but you cannot build a power plant. So at the end of the day, remittances cannot actually trigger the development that we need. More important, remittances are circumscribed by liberal developmental policy. All right? Because these people, the government policy that emphasizes remittance are the ones that emphasize movement abroad, right? And it is likely that migrant remittances and the efforts of those of us left behind are appropriate agents for reversing underdevelopment. It's not likely because of how we spend the money we see from abroad. Now, this is the last slide on the general critique of the new economic and liberal migration. And it says this theory realizes brain drain. Right? That's why I can tell us that we have too many doctors. We have too many social scientists. It is the new economics of labor migration that talks about people bringing money that sort of informs this sort of misguided statement by public officers. And you see, about 3 weeks ago, Nigeria entered the pact with Saudi Arabia to talk about how Nigeria can formally export labor to South Africa. This is what we're talking about. Nigeria will not train manpower to go and develop Saudi Arabia because of remittance. All right? And we fail to forget that migration actually physically separates families and thus to reduce what sociologists call mechanical solidarity. That close family bonding, family bonds, is usually reduced by migration. So let me now go to the empirical. We have given a general critique of the downside, mentioned the downside of the new economics of labor migration. Let us look at the evidence. What does the evidence say? Now, according to Cindy and Karimi, the details that lead to migration, this include things like households with female heirs tend to receive more remittances. Okay, you can see the distinction there. Households with more educated adults send more migrants. Size of households also matter because larger households tend to send more migrants. Households with more security of land tend to send more migrants. Wealthy households tend to send more migrants, not the poor ones. Now, households with more land per capita tends to generate fewer migrants. And the next one there is that areas with harsh climates, of course, send more migrants. Areas with high population density send more migrants. Households with non-productive assets receive more remittance. And migrants from land-owning households send more remittances. Rural households with opportunities for work send less migrants. So these are the intricacies which tend to belie the new economics of labor migration, who just says that, oh, the moment family needs, they take a rational decision, this man will go and bring money and will develop a family. These are intricacies that mediate migration, which are lost to the new economics of labor migration. Now, this is more of the critique, the empirical critique now. This is about Nigeria now. Mba found out that the remittances in Nigeria, they negatively affect Nigerian household consumption because of the stifling bottlenecks, bureaucratic bottlenecks, and high transaction costs. All right? So all the time, you see families that are either looking at what is the exchange rate, how much did my brother send, How much is my bank charging? So people are consumed with remittance. Now, Mba also found out that remittances negatively influence access to health care. Because Nigerians do not prioritize health care. They only see health care when they are sick. All right? It was also found that remittances negatively affect education in Nigeria because Nigerians do not prioritize education. They prioritize other expenditures. Okay? More empirical findings. Someone, for example, found out that remittances decrease the probability of recipients being self-employed by 28.4%. So you see people now become dependent on remittances. They don't want to work. Right? I can be confirmed that remittances actually have significant positive effects on the Nigerian economic growth. But this is the short run. Because in the long run, they negatively and significantly impact on growth. And the last one there by Odakbenwa, through the study, concluded that unstable macroeconomic policy environment will add to discourage migrant remittance inflows. All right. The Nigerian case, the case in point. If you don't know, you are not sure what your remittance will fetch, you are less likely to send those remittances. So then I'm coming to the end of my discussion now because I've spent time to discuss the new economics of labor migration. I talked about its assumption, theoretical foundations, the positive aspects, how they lead to a development and so on and so forth. And I also went through the critique. Now, what is the way out? I've tried to present what I call the situational approach to the new economics of labor migration. And contrary to the new economic of labor migration, migration may not be a calculated response to or flight from misery and poverty. It's not people just go away because of misery, because of poverty or such bad things. Right? Decisions, actions, and reactions are situational. The decision you take to migrate or not to migrate, to sell remittance or not, all these are mediated by the situations you find yourself. For example, the decision to migrate may be fortuitous. You may just migrate without your needing to. All right? Boko Haram strike, you must run away. All right? There may be no pre-migration or family meetings to decide whether, because the moment the situation arises, you just leave without preparation. And there may be no information about the destinations where you are going to. Anywhere is better than where you are. All right? And again, even if you know, precarity in destinations may not deter migrants. People go to Lagos to go and live under the bridge without employment, without a house, without secure food, but they go anyway. All right, so there are so many issues there. And this was also tries to tell us that poor and unemployed persons often migrate into poverty and unemployment. It's not that family needs to go to, like the new economics of labor migration saying there's a prior, everything rational. At times you find that people just move into worse area, to have worse life. And this bright light theory, all right? The electricity, the high life in Abuja, the beautiful city. You want to live there. You don't want to live in your village. You want to live in Lagos, you want to live in Abuja. What do you want to do in Abuja? I don't know. I want to go and enjoy high life. And of course, this push and pull conundrum, we are not sure what actually pushes people. That's why earlier said that we need more theory, more theorizing on, because you find yourself, some people migrate, some people don't migrate. All right, for so many reasons. And again, this famous or popular Japan syndrome has now morphed into, we have to be very careful about this. Japan syndrome has morphed into socioeconomic and political resistance and alienation of youth from the environment because of this hype that, oh, you migrate, you go to meet Eldorado, get sort of things. People don't Japan. And this has turned the youth against their own country. All right. Now, so how do we, if migration is about going to get profit, okay, about how do we conceptualize voluntarism in modern day slavery? People go into slavery even by agreement. We all know about the Benin studies of a few years ago, and of course, poor people don't. It's not all people travel. In fact, poor people travel less than rich people. And finally, it is that the empiricism in new labor economics, new economics of labor migration confirms that the migration remittance development members, yes, remittance leads to development, but its approach is not conclusive, as he believes that there are so many intervening variables mediate between migration and outcomes. Now, in this little table here, I show that there are so many factors. There are about 20 factors that drive migration. The destinations are varied, actors are many, the situations different, and the outcomes are. So I think this is my last slide now. We'll talk about policy implications. Policy implications are quite clear. It is important to ensure that our government policy does not facilitate people moving abroad. It should actually be aimed at people staying behind the country. For that reason, government has to address a production-driven, anti-functional employment creating economy. It must provide social protection, upgrade of all basic infrastructure, and subsidize education. And this is not because this is expensive. These are what even the developed countries where we go to, what they do to keep their people happy and resident in their home. So the new economics of labor migration is a medium-range theory which tells only one side of the story. If we want to understand the complex relationship with migration and development, we need new theories about the multiple ways in which remittance interact and influence economic development of households and communities at large. I believe that its new approach is a flexible, adaptable, and relatable approach, which is dynamic enough to address all scenarios. So let me leave you with the most important slide, and that's the one thanking all of you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Prof, for such a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. We can react with the emoji of hands clapping to appreciate him for the presentation. Thank you so much, Prof. I want to start by apologizing for a network glitch that we experienced during the presentation. That's one of the Nigerian factors that we have. Thank you, Prof, for the presentation where you re-examined new economics of labor migration. We have taken much of our time, so I wouldn't want to spend much time in doing a recap of this wonderful presentation. Now we'll be going into questions and contributions, which you can signify with a raise of hand, so we can take questions and contributions. Okay, please, we'll make the comments brief and short. Thank you very much. Let me hand over the floor to Professor Hakeem Aitijadi, please. Prof, you have the floor, sir. You can unmute yourself, Prof.
Thank you very much. I believe, is it Professor or Dr. Adeja was raised his hand before me, so I will yield to him to go first while I go second. Thank you.
Well, Prof, thank you for yielding to me, but because of time, I will not do a back and forth and say you go first. First, let me congratulate Professor Kolosha for a good presentation. Two quick things I know that maybe time could have restricted Prof from looking at is that basically migration is not about remittances only, because there is a key level of skills transfer when we look at migration. People bring in skills and other things besides strict remittances. Maybe if Prof mentioned it, I lost it. The second one is, yes, migration could be to some extent group decision, but the key driver to move, I just wanted Prof to contextualize that properly, because I know economists like working with households because, I mean, households group level decisions are collective and they could, help you look at resource pooling and do your consumption analysis, your poverty measurement. But in terms of migration, does Prof really think that a household analysis, which concentrates more on broader socioeconomic issues, could give you a good background? I just want to share that. Meanwhile, thank you, Prof, for a good presentation. And Professor Akin, thank you. Next time I will reject your offer, sir.
I think Professor's presentation, Professor Kolosha's presentation, cleared the fuzziness that I, noticed in the title of the paper from slide 25 through to 29, where he discussed, he tagged it a situational approach to the new economic of labor migration. Okay, you see, theories are theories, but when you started, Prof, and you may, clarify this fuzziness, both in terms of methodology and empirical explanation. You mentioned Mediterranean, through the Mediterranean. So I was looking for more of reality and the colonization of these theories. It is good for people to come up with theories, concepts, but the reality for policy making is what should be the next step that will explain the situational approach that you emphasize on those 4 or 5 slides. International labor, migration, as Professor Adejo mentioned, it is not limited to remittances. And sincerely, I wasn't, I do not have I didn't know that I would be listening to more of remittances. If the new economic labor migration theory is about remittances, perhaps the title of your paper should have been modified. Lastly, this type of paper, in my opinion, should have been periodized. In other words, periodization for the sociologist, for the historian, for anyone is very, very important, because it explains specificity, it limits and kind of guide us against further probing in terms of, oh, I am looking at this case study from Kenya through the Mediterranean, from Sokoto through the Mediterranean to Europe. You mentioned the New Deal with the Saudi Arabians. Perhaps that could have been a major case study. And then you look at Nigeria. That is enough. It could even be a book on its own. So I will stop at that point and we continue the conversation. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Akim Chani, for your contribution. Thank you, Prof. David Ademoju, for your contribution. I can see on that, I can see Charles. I don't know if you're a prof or a doctor, please. You can make a contribution before our presenter reacts to the comments. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, moderator. I want to thank Professor Chiko Kolocha for this important presentation. This topic, the reservations about linking labor migration to purely remittances. I think probably that might have been advised by the economics content of the topic, because it's linked directly to economics. While I accept that it would have been good to also bring in some other aspects of migration, for you can never handle holistically any topic, in a limited time like this. I'm sure it must have been advised purely by the limitation of the time he has to present this. By and large, it's a very good presentation. The only thing I want to say, more of a general something rather than academic, is more presentations like this should be made available. I think this advice goes to the center, of Noun that is hosting this presentation. Presentations like this should not be limited to the four walls of the institutions. They should be sent to specific areas, aspects of government for implementation, for somehow to create a reservoir of ideas on how to handle social economic problems in the country. This migration is a very broad topic. I remember the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, in one of his public addresses, conferences, he said that Africa is the graveyard of African elites. And what does he mean by that? He says that when African elites make money, they send it abroad to go and spend it there. But when they die, they bring them back to Africa. So in other words, Africa is only suited for burial, but when it comes to resources for critical development, it's sent outside. That's a form of the economics of migration. So I believe that the more of these kind of presentations that are made available to government, especially now that we have a government that somehow is beginning to address some of the decades of neglect of domestic development, it's better to be presenting them and not limiting them to the four walls of universities or to those who have the privilege of listening to issues like this. So, but on the whole, I want to appreciate the presenter. He's a well-known scholar, and it's not surprising that he made this beautiful presentation. And I also want to thank the center now for creating this kind of opportunity for presentations like this, and it should be continued. So I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this Zoom platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your contribution and insights. Your comments are well noted, and I wish to let you know that our reports are circulated to the appropriate authorities and those who are in migration space for implementation. However, your comments are well noted. I wish to invite our presenter to react to the comments.
Now, there were 3 comments, one from Professor Dejo. All right. So what he said was migration is not just about remittances. All right. We talked about the positive aspect of migration, which includes skills transfer. And the household is inappropriate. In fact, this is part of the critique of the new economics of labor migration. The new economics of labor migration tends to overemphasize remittances, tends to overemphasize the rationality involved in decision making, and also tends to overemphasize the role of remittances in causing development in the migrant sending areas. So I agree entirely that migration should not be about remittances. Now, about with reference to Professor Hakim, a founding father of this center. Well, same thing I have to say. In terms of periodization, the new economics of labor migration theory is compared to the theories I mentioned earlier. It's recent, the recent theory. And you see, studies up to I made some references in my slides. Some studies have said like 2025, justifying the new economics of labor migration as one of the critical theories of migration. But my own emphasis is that it is not. And I agree entirely with both Professor Hakim and Adejo that migration is more than remittances, and about the experience of people. These experiences are not limited to people in the dark passage through Mediterranean. All right, it's not so. There's the Mexico to America. I think that one is more critical. People dying every day. So I agree entirely with you that migration is not just about remittances. Now, to modify the title in view of what I said between slides 25 to 29, well, I think what I actually did was to give another view to the new economics of labor migration. Whether the title is appropriate, well, but thank you for the observation. Then Mr. Tasachuenu also talked about the same thing, that migration is limited. No, it is my critique. Why I wrote this paper, why I gave this talk is I am amazed that in spite of its short words, a lot of people still try to buy into the new economics of labor migration, like the new pact we have with Saudi Arabia. This year, 2026, Nigeria entered a pact to export labor to Saudi Arabia. You can imagine. Many of them may have been trained at public expense. Then you send them to Saudi Arabia, the same money for people to buy generator and bury their dead. So I agree entirely that we should not overemphasize remittances. Okay, about bringing in other aspects of migration. This is what I've done in this paper, trying to show that, like Professor Hakim said just now, migration is a multifaceted thing, and we should not overemphasize remittances. I believe that now that migration is gradually gaining independence, by the time it becomes a discipline.
Okay, while I wait for him to come back online, let me take this message from the chat box. Thanks, Prof. This message is from Paul Enebeli. He says, thanks, Prof. The issue is very contemporary. We need to continue to interrogate the consequences of labor migration to our families in all its aspects and ramifications. Many of us are victims, and there is a cause for concern. This is from Paul Enebeli. I don't know if Prof is back online. Okay, so are there any other contributions to today's discourse while we're waiting to come back, or before we call it a wrap?
I just want to add, before Prof comes back, that yes, what the new economics of labor migration is trying to do is shifting from the neoclassical models of origin and destination countries. And that is why for some of us, we really want to interrogate the levels of decision units, because the new economic model is moving from individual to household or communities. And they see the motivation not as wage differential or personal gain, but as risk-sharing household. So I am not an academic, so I will want to use this opportunity to talk to people like Professor Okorocha to dig deeper beyond, because when they look beyond the role of remittances, you now need to look at market content in terms of labor issues. Then what will return migration be? Because in neoclassical model, the return migration is less emphasized. When I mean return migration, I mean somebody has spent ages in the US and is coming back to Nigeria claiming to bring skills or for FDI. What is really bringing? Is it just trying to use our country as a stop or not? So I want to thank you very much for that and wonderful lecture, Professor Kolosha and the center. Highly appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the contribution. On behalf of the director of the center, I wish to thank each and every one of you for attending today's webinar. And I encourage you also to come join us for our next month's webinar, where we're having also an interesting topic by an erudite scholar. I also wish to encourage us to visit all our social media handles and follow us as displayed on the chat link, so as to get information and updates about what we do in the center. I wish to thank our very senior colleagues who always give us a lending hand and support in this program. On behalf of my director, who actually had to step out for an emergency, and every member of the center, I wish to thank our presenter and each and every one of you for attending today's webinar. Thank you very much and have a fruitful day ahead.